Welcome, everyone. I'm Dave Klein. Welcome to the next edition of Simulate Cybersecurity Broadcast. Today, we're going to be talking about preempting cyber attack disruptions, critical factors with Chuck Brooks. Chuck, how are you today?
Doing great, Dave. How about yourself?
Doing awesome. And by the way, for this broadcast, we have a great article that Chuck wrote in Homeland Security Today. Let me pop real quickly the article title here: Why Proactive Cybersecurity is a Must in Today's Sophisticated Threat Environment. It has over 10,000 plus views. It's really has resonated with people. And so I encourage all of you to take a look at it. I put the URL on both YouTube and LinkedIn video so people can click on it and see it. And that's awesome. So today, again, we're talking about preempting cyber attacks with proactiveness. And in doing so, I thought we would tell a story. And Chuck, you were at DHS, who has over 51,000 people, I think, at this point. You were employee below 100, sub 100. Right? And you joined
yes,
very early on. And we talk about the cyber threats today leading to being the need to be preemptive. You know, after 9/11, and we think about this country needing to be preemptive, that was kind of a similar story.
Absolutely. There's a lot of parallels. I mean, we're looking at a situation where we were caught off guard, which we have been dozens of times now by cyber attacks. But this was very severe, of course, 9/11. And so we built the second largest agency by taking a variety of other agencies and sort of meshing them together, law enforcement agencies and non-law enforcement agencies and customs agencies, et cetera. And it wasn't an easy effort initially. I was lucky because I got to not only help set up the Office of Legislative Affairs, which is really critical when you're getting funding from Congress, but also Science and Technology Directorate, where we looked at a lot of the threats from a technology perspective, from everything from transportation to chemical, biological explosives to cyber in its initial efforts. So it was an exciting time. And I think the parallels are there. I mean, really, you have to have a risk management approach, know what the threats are, and develop a strategy of how to contemplate what may be out there on the horizon that you need to mitigate. And so there's no really, I mean, it's just really taking an element of cybersecurity and an element of security and really distilling it to its core.
Absolutely. And we talk about the threats today, right? And the cybersecurity threats. And there were two studies we did this last year, Simulate. Each had over 800 participants. One was called the Ransomware Study, Unexpected Reasons for Optimism. And the second one was our 2022 Data Breaches Survey Report. I'm going to put those in the notes section of the videos. So if you're on LinkedIn and YouTube, you should be able to get the URLs for them. And one of the things that was interesting was the studies found that attacks are coming faster. They're trying to do more damage. The idea of you know, there was that movie Stealing Cars. What was it called? Gone in 60 seconds or something like that.
Yes. Yeah.
The attacks are super weaponized. So they're often automated to the point where they can get an Active Directory within a very short period of time in a very automated way, and then the real attack occurs and it's launched, and it's very devastating. The thing that was interesting in both these studies, and a good reason for optimism, is in both situations, the studies talked about the fact that this has become a business impacting event when it occurs. It's a boardroom level event, and both studies found this. And in the case of the ransomware study, it found that most of the participants had experienced ransomware. However, duration and damage was lower because they had gotten additional funds. They had practiced their incident response plans. They had gotten engaged with leadership on what is critical for you and that kind of stuff. And in the Data Breaches Survey Report, the biggest takeaway statistically was if executives met over 14 times a year with the cybersecurity staff to say, this is what's business affecting, this is what I care about. They had lower number of breaches because it showed that engagement. So let's start by talking about that business continuity.
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's a really encouraging report because the first thing it says to me that there's communication, which is really the first step, and it's from the C-suite to the IT shops, the CIO, CISO, to actually the accounting and the PR, everyone, and including legal, because it's really a reputation issue for a lot of companies. If you are hacked, you may be taken out operationally, or your product and image may be damaged. So reputation is always a priority concern. And when reputation is damaged, it's also a cost concern because you're losing business. So that's where it goes to. But I love the idea that that this is sort of like looking at it like a first responder would look at, going back to the DHS analogies. When you have an incident, you communicate on your radios, you have a strategy where you're going and who's going and where, what you need to do to isolate and protect the areas. Similar to cybersecurity, I mean, business resilience really is coordinating strategy. And you have to have an incident response plan in place. You have to practice it. And you really have to, if you go back to my Homeland Security Today article, it really is, you really look at, first what you have to do is you have to go to look at the code and applications and see whether they're misconfigured, whether there's malware planted. Look at the basics first, which is the easiest for hackers to do. Then also, of course, check your hardware and as well as your software. But I mean, it really is a plan. And, until businesses really all adhere to that, they're all going to be a little bit vulnerable because they're easy pickings for the hackers that say, if there's no defenses and no coordination, I'm going in and I'm going to do a ransomware attack right now. And they do.
Yeah, for me, working for Simulate, which is a continuous, offensive testing, continuous simulation platform, the kind of things that I see too is that you talk about the practice. The idea is, in some ways, you're not illuminated to what the threat can actually do until you practice it for real, right? And the idea is, I remember, for decades of my experience, coming into companies and recommending pen testing and other types of testing to show misconfiguration, show the problems, that it's not just having the right security controls in place, it's are they configured appropriately? And more than just security controls, there's all that what I call the first tier controls, your cloud, your applications, your operating system, your Active Directory, your Exchange server. And people forget that security controls are not just the ones that you purchase. They're ones that come with the existing stuff, right? And the idea is you and I could be great, but if the executive vice president can pop a PowerShell, on a plane flight, not a good deal, right? If an accountant has the rights of their boss, who happens to be the deputy administrator, and clicks on an invite, and even though the deputy administrator didn't click on the invite, but the other person did, and causes a huge malware attack, that's an issue, right? So the idea of permissions-based things, the idea of least privilege, multi-factor authentication, all these fundamental things are so critical as part of that first step. And by testing, right, by actually offensively testing and doing tabletop exercises, not just having plans, but working through them and realizing, oh my God, this isn't going to work. We think this is going to work, but in the plan at this point, it can't work.
It's like if you want to be good at something, you test it and rehearse it. And that's what law enforcement does that's what our military does. And that's what cybersecurity needs to do too. And the validation and the simulation testing is really an imperative now because the threats keep morphing. What you did yesterday not be valid today. So you really need to continually check what those controls are, whether something has come in, which you don't know about, and also test your resilience. New people come in, new permissions are added to the company. Some are maybe left open, which happens a backdoor. So you really need to be on guard. And the only way to do that is continually to look at, and I think the best way is the simulation, but to continue looking at what is out there in your environment. And, when you do that, you mitigate the threats immediately.
Let's talk about the executive and the business. I know when I started in this industry and when you started in this industry, bringing in the executives, right, wasn't necessarily the first thing people would do, right? They would be afraid that they would impede the situation and stuff like that, or not understand. But as time has gone on, this is something that executives demand. And more importantly, I think they bring a special view to the situation that is not found elsewhere. Like, for example, in trying to assess what truly is considered business continuity. Can you talk about that a bit?
Sure. This is really, like I said earlier, a really important area that's changed in the last couple of years because the C-suite used to be almost totally ignorant of what the IT shop was doing or cybersecurity was doing. It was alien to them, and they looked at it as a cost item. Now they're looking at, as you say, as a business item. So they're looking at how it relates to every segment of the business, and that's where they bring the expertise in, because they know when your operations are down or when you're facing a ransomware attack. It has going to have implications across the board in the company, and more importantly, what they're brought in to do is assign responsibility. And before it was all on the CIO or the CISO, and it was like reaching out to people that had no responsibility or accountability. Now everyone is being held accountable, and I think that's really where it kind of starts from the top down. And unless you have that, the company is not going to be resilient. You really need to know your roles, know whose responsibilities are for every aspect of any kind of breach. And you also need to know in the preventive sense too, because this is a part of doing business now. Expected even more and more in the next coming years as interconnectivity grows and the threat landscape grows, exponentially every year, and the sophistication of the actors out there, the criminal gangs primarily, who are really interested in this because they can get paid and make money. They get more coordinated and collaborative, and they now are using what you said earlier, the automation, the artificial intelligence, machine learning to initiate their attacks and find gaps. So you really need to be ready before you even open doors for business right now. And cybersecurity's got to be a key element of it, any business you're in.
I agree with that. And I think that the leadership, it's more than just a chain of command. And that has been important too. It used to be just a CISO. We talk about CISOs having half-lives of only a year at a company, those kind of things, terrible things, right? But the key is bringing the business in. There's a real chain of command for ownership and who owns what when this occurs. But also I think what's important too, and I've seen this on many occasions, where the technical staff will come to the business and say, okay, you asked us about ransomware, ransom tests. The worst possible scenario is we could be down for a week, but after a week's time, we can recover, right? It'll take us a week to recover. And the business goes, oh, no.
Yes.
It needs to be less than 48 hours. If it's if it's more than 48 hours, we're going to run into a cash flow issue, or we're going to run into a production issue, or we're going to run into some contractual thing that's going to get us in trouble, or even some cases, standards they have to adhere to. And so the key thing is, like with the executives, it's not only just setting that chain of command correctly on what happens, who do I need to call, and who's responsible for what. It's also the concept of saying what's important. What is business continuity?
Yes.
And what is acceptable as far as what are we targeting as critical? How long could they be down? How can we have resiliency and things like that? I think those are really kind of important things that the business comes in and brings to that table. That is important. And there's also the final thing. So we talk about chain of command. We talk about what is important. I think the final thing is that hall pass. That if they are involved, the right resources will come to fruition.
That's I think really the key is for most businesses in the last few years, really budget has been the issue with cybersecurity. Again, it was looked at as a last resort. We don't need to put money there. We can put money in sales and marketing. Let's leave it be. So that is changing, and particularly changing in the healthcare industries and other industries where they found out the hard way when they get a ransomware attack or they're taken out, and all of a sudden they're down and they're panicking. So I think that has really changed, because it goes down to a budget issue. If you have the CEO saying this is important, the CFO is going to put money towards it. So that is a bottom line element for anything. And you need to have money to operate, and you see that in government now. For the first time, I think DHS CISA has received a very viable budget of $2.5 billion. I mean, it means that they've prioritized cybersecurity in the federal government for the first time. So, it's always been a spend item and always been talked about, but this is really a thorough program. So industry has to follow the same lead, and I think that's partly what Zero Trust is trying to do too, is trying to get people to look at it holistically and look where the strategy gaps are. But to use that buzzword, but it's really not a buzzword. It's really risk management. So, if you just look at risk management, what do you need to do for your company? And it goes back again to the simulation, the testing, to the rehearsal, to the incident response. All of those elements you would find in any kind of strong leadership in the civilian agency, you should find in industry too. And I think industry is starting to mirror that.
So the next question I have for you is, in running a proactive cybersecurity program, we've talked a little bit about the need to bring the executives in to hear the feedback, to have them set who's responsible for what. Here's what we deem is critical. Here are times and damage limitations that we expect, and here's the resources I'll provide you. From a technical to technical perspective, so a technical leadership perspective, talking to your teams, what are some of the big requirements?
Well, I think first of all, you have to have accountability of what's on your network. A lot of companies don't understand the tools they have already, how to orchestrate them, um, what their priorities are or their gaps are. You have to identify. Every industry is different. What compliance issues you need to adhere to, very important too. And then once you sort of get an itinerary of what you have, then you can look at where you're going to allocate your resources. And of course, I think beyond this, there's always the issue of having a strong expertise in cybersecurity expertise, which is difficult to find. I mean, there's a shortage, but there are managed services out there and the opportunities, and a lot of the tools that you talked about can be done without a lot of technical expertise. So I think there's a change happening where a lot of the cybersecurity companies are putting out products and software that are making it more user friendly, so you don't have to be an electrical engineer, a software engineer to be able to manage it. So I think that's really what the CEO is looking at is, okay, are we equipped the right way? Are we facing do we have the right adequate tools for the threats we're facing, and how do we use them? And if something does happen, what do we do? What's our incident response? And if someone does leave, do I have someone that down the line that understands how to work the system, the IT backbone? So I think all that is really now a CEO or a leadership profile for anyone in any company.
That's kind of critical. And you also think about the shortage of people in cybersecurity, right? There's two things really in cybersecurity. One is diversity, and I mean diversity in both the traditional sense of that term, and also from the sense of there needs to be different types of skill sets in the industry, right? So I think that's a challenge, number one, and number two is absolutely education levels. So I think the idea behind that, and you talked about different vendors being better at incorporating ease of use, automation, explanation, prescriptive results, these kind of things that occur within a software package to say, you might have an expert, but the expert might be busy on other things. How can we delegate to other people and educate them as they go on the job, right? It really is, it's a prime example of where we're going to need to have good human development within our IT workforces and good diversity to be successful, and to pick in solutions that make sense and help convey that. I also think another thing you said was very important is back to simulated testing. We talk about the fact of tool excess and not knowing what you have, or having disparate solutions. The idea here really is you need solutions that simplify, not make things more complex. Right?
Yes, exactly right. And I think you also have to look at this from a small, medium business perspective too, because most of those type of companies don't have the expertise or resources to be able to do what a bigger company can do in terms of purchasing and bringing on people. So they have to rely more on those kind of elements, particularly the automation, without having the ability to do all that, or the managed services role of it. But
Right.
And I think that's the crux of American business too. I think with the small and medium business has always been our sense of entrepreneurship and our building in our cities. So it's not just the big guys; it's the small guys too, and any business is affected.
Right. And you're right. It's totally the automation. And again, the managed security services providers, the MSSPs, right? In deciding, yes. And I'd argue in some ways that makes sense for the small people, and even the big people. Even the big people are saying, you know what? I'm not doing desktop as a service. That we can outsource. Right? You break a laptop, you send it to this PO box. We get you another one. We're good to go. Right? Yeah. So there's certain aspects to even the larger businesses of I don't need to have my people handle this.
You're seeing more and more of that. I witnessed it firsthand in a lot of the companies. It's also because it takes them out of their focus area, and they want to be able to have more resources put into other things. And so they look at the balance. Do you hire people? Do you build the infrastructure for that, or do you outsource it? And more of the bigger companies are outsourcing it, and also they're doing a lot of stuff on the cloud. So I think the combination of that is making it easier for them to do that, and it really goes back into our sort of hybrid remote work society. So a lot of that comes back to it.
One of the questions I have also is I think about, you talk about not having all the knowledge, and, the fact is, I worked on Obama's, critical infrastructure presidential directive that started to try to deal with some of the things of having, ISACs for various, deemed critical industries. But in some ways, cybersecurity is not critical to every industry. You and I could sit there and say, we're done with this. We'll never be done with this. I know both of us will both be doing this for a very long time, by the way. I'm just speaking hypothetically. Yeah, we're done with this. We're going to open a t-shirt shop. Can you imagine that? You and I opening a t-shirt shop. So Chuck and Dave's t-shirts, right?
Yeah.
Even in that situation, we would be reliant on software as a service for our suppliers, our vendors, our shipping, all that kind of stuff. So the point is, every industry today is essential. How can we develop, or what is there for industries that are not critical today to seek information from their peers?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it is critical, and you're saying exactly that. I think ISACs and NIST also has a lot of industry-specific risk management applications that they make public for free. But I think you're seeing a lot more coordination, even among competitors now. Certainly through CISA at DHS for critical infrastructure, which they deem pretty much. I think it was 23 of them. They cover them pretty thoroughly. Some more than others, like energy, obviously is really important. But there are other things that are sort of now being looked at that hadn't been looked at in the past. And one is satellites in space. We're moving a lot of our infrastructure up there, our sensors and our communication capabilities. And all of a sudden we're saying, okay, you know what? They're on private satellites, a lot of this stuff. There's no encryption on some of them. They're sitting ducks, both from the relay stations on the ground and from up there for a lot of the vendors. And they haven't looked at it as critical infrastructure in the past. But now I think with what's happened in Ukraine and Russia, with Russia taking out a Viasat satellite, they're going to take a second look at that now and look at, as we continue to evolve into those areas, everything is infrastructure, critical infrastructure. Yeah. I look at it that way. What is it? I mean, unless once you're hit, it is critical. And if you're a business of any kind, whether you're brick and mortar or whether you're a Fortune 500 company, it's still your infrastructure that's being hit. To you, it's critical.
But what I also think is neat, you talk about CISA, what I think is really neat is I do a weekly cybersecurity newscast. And what's really kind of neat for me to see is the British equivalent of CISA, the Indian equivalent of CISA, the Canadian version. And I could basically have more than two hands to do this on. Seeing the various CISA organizations within various countries also make direct pleas to citizens and the private sector. And so what's I think is kind of neat is to see in various countries that etiquette is. I know we're here for the federal, our federal government, but you know what? We need to tell you something anyway. And citizens, you need to watch out for this kind of spear phishing attack. Or businesses, we're having problems with this with your Gmail addresses. There's too many of them that are being taken over, and they're sending for invoices. They change where they need to go, and it's causing fraud. It's neat to see that appear. Right. Yeah. It is a sense of awareness and responsibility almost.
I think so. It's consumer focused, and that's where it should be. I mean, Shields Up from CISA, it went out to everybody, not just companies. But and I think it's also because of the nature of the threats we're facing. They're organized criminal gangs that are looking for prey, and a lot of the prey are consumers or related to smaller companies or companies that operate through them. So I think. That makes a lot of sense. And I also see there's an enhanced cooperation among CISA and a lot of the foreign countries you just mentioned. So they're sharing intelligence, which is really good too. And then they're taking that intelligence and they're distilling it and they're sharing it to the consumer, to companies, to critical infrastructure holders, to everybody. So I think there's more of a global perspective, at least from the good guys, of the need to work together. And that comes down back to the public-private partnership. And I know CISA has put a lot of effort into that, particularly Jen Easterly recently, where they're not only just CISA, they've included NSA and DoD and other agencies where they're working together to make sure that information is given properly and timely to consumers, to businesses, and actually to state and local governments too.
Very cool. On another thing, we're talking about incident response practices, tabletop exercises, practicing our incident response plans. What would you say is a good outline or good guidance for doing incident response practice?
Well, I think I got to go defer again to either to MITRE or to NIST, which actually have some extensive published risk management programs that are industry specific. But in general, I mean, there's a bottom line is that you have to have a strategy built in, and anyone could build a strategy from themselves, from their knowledge. And it's really more almost starting off with a checklist. What you said is, okay, what assets do I have to need to protect? What is my key data? Do I need to isolate it? Is it encrypted? Okay, then what tools do I need to have around it to protect it, fortify it? And then, of course, going back to the initial part of it is, first you have to test and validate and see where your gaps are and where your potential malware lies inside your company already, because I'm sure there's a lot of it with most companies. And then I'd also know who has identity access management, really key if you're running any company, to see who's logging in, who's logging out, who's taking stuff or exfiltrating data outside the business. So there's a lot of those key things that are done initially. So I think then you get to the point where is that I think if you're a company, okay, expect to get hacked. Everyone's just like COVID, everyone's going to eventually get it. Looks like,
Yes.
maybe a version of it. But same with hacking. I mean, everyone is connected now in so many ways. So okay, what do you do when you are hacked? And that again goes down to, what's your plan? Who's going to be the speaker of to the public? Who's going to direct stuff from the inside? Are you going to shut down and go to a backup system? Do you have a response for malware and ransomware if someone tries to extort you? Do you have insurance? All those things are factors to look into when you're doing an incident response plan.
It's very good. And you think about it, we talk about doing attacks, simulated attacks, constantly to find your gaps, your areas you need to cover, doing the incident response practice and stuff like that, and figure out what needs to be tweaked and things like that. Let's also talk about building resilience in from the get-go, right? And this also comes back to your time at Homeland Security, in that with DHS, there's the concept of, well, what happens if we go to our walkie-talkies, right? We go to the walkie-talkies and they're down. Well, then we need to have a phone backup. And with a phone backup, then we have this kind of backup, right? The concept of resiliency in our infrastructure brought to cyber.
Real important, but your analogy is a great one, because one of the biggest problems DHS faced initially from 9/11 is no one could talk to each other. The firemen and police couldn't communicate. Different jurisdictions couldn't communicate. And the first thing that they focused on at DHS was interoperability of communications for first responders, which was not as easy as it sounds, because that involves also not just the technology, but the coordination, the training, the protocols, all that goes into that. And same with that, with everything you do in cybersecurity, it really comes down to having the right protocols. And, with DHS, I think that was really the best example is the first responders. Finally, after many years, they're able to deal with a situation such as a hurricane and get back up and functioning within hours, or have and this wasn't easy, and state and local are rehearsing it constantly. Training is a constant thing. Tabletops are a constant thing. All that is really the same applications apply to cybersecurity. If you're a business, if you're an industry, you need to continually train, and you have to have security by design. And that is, design in your risk management program. A lot of the industries, unfortunately, were built many years ago, and security wasn't a consideration. So they've had, particularly with operational technology and energy and others. So when you're dealing with legacy systems, it's not so easy. But with new companies right now, a lot of them are software based. They're really not a lot heavy on an infrastructure and machinery. So if you're dealing with that, you have a lot of more opportunity now to use verification testing and simulation without hardly any cost, and to do it over and over. And it should be integral to your procedures. That is really the security by design. That's one of the first steps. And then, depending what you're doing, you look at other things that we mentioned, some of the aspects of the multi-factor authentication, other thing, defense in depth, having isolation, Kubernetes and containers, etc. But all those are considerations you have to do on your risk management plan, and whether you need it or not. And I think if you want to encapsulate it all, it goes into the zero trust thing. But again, it's just really risk management strategy. Everyone is different, but everyone has some of the same basics, and some of the same basics are identifying what is a threat, identifying what you need to protect, and identifying what you have in your system. So if you do that, you're off to a good start.
Absolutely. And in certain cases, finding areas that might have redundancy. And you mentioned some great examples, if you have a cloud backup, is a cloud backup in multiple clouds, multiple locations, right? Things that we didn't think about before. The idea of Active Directory. Let's say it gets hit. How fast can you bring up a secondary Active Directory, right? A whole new infrastructure where people have to reset their passwords, but they're good to go, right? That kind of thing. Exchange, if Exchange gets taken down, is there a way to go to Exchange online or to a backup one, get you going? Do you have a secondary set of addresses? All these kind of things are people thinking about too. The redundancy today with things that are go on, which is really
a
great.
backup strategy. Yes, exactly. And Active Directory is a good point because it's been a favorite avenue for a lot of hackers and a very successful one over the past few years. To have those basics done is a really important aspect, I think, for your planning.
Excellent. Well, Chuck, thank you so much for attending today. This has been, as usual, an awesome conversation. Love it.
It's been fun.
It's been awesome. And folks, the article, again, there's a companion article to this, Why Proactive Cybersecurity is a Must in Today's Sophisticated Threat Environment, that Chuck wrote. It's being way watched, over 10,000 views so far. Very, very good article. I suggest everyone read it. I want to thank everyone for attending. This is Dave Klein. This has been the Cybersecurity broadcast. Thanks so much.